There's a chemical inside your fruit tree called auxin. It is produced at the very tip of every growing shoot, and its only job, its entire evolutionary purpose, is to tell every bud below it to stay asleep. One tip, one signal. 100 dormant buds silenced. This is called apical dominance. It is the reason your tree grows taller every year but never wider. The reason the top is green and the bottom is bare. The reason it flowers at the crown and produces nothing at eye level where you can actually reach the fruit. Researchers have known this since the 1950s. Michigan State published an entire pruning framework based on disrupting this single hormone. Cut the tip, and within 72 hours, the buds below receive a rush of cytokinins that breaks their dormancy. The tree does not just grow, it erupts. Yet somehow, in 71 million gardening households, this knowledge was never passed down. Your grandparents pruned every winter without knowing why it worked. Then, a generation skipped the practice entirely, and now millions of fruit trees stand bald, silent, and fruitless, waiting for a cut that never comes. This video will change that, not with opinions, not with gardening folklore, with the 4 specific cuts that plant scientists have studied, measured, and published in peer-reviewed journals over the past 90 years, beginning with Wendt and Thieman's landmark, 1937 book, Phytohormones, and continuing through field trials at Michigan State, the University of Massachusetts, Penn State, Purdue, Oregon State, and multiple international research stations. Every claim in this video has a source, every number comes from a study, and every technique can be done with tools you already own. Before the 4 cuts, you need to understand one thing. Your bald fruit tree is not dead. It is not diseased. It has not run out of energy. It has made a calculated decision. The tree evaluated through hormones, through light sensors in its leaves, through the ratio of sugar it produces versus sugar it spends, that the cost of maintaining its lower and interior branches exceeds the return. So it shut them down. The buds went dormant. The bark went smooth. The leaves thinned until the interior became a dark, tangled cage where no sunlight reaches and no fruit forms. Michigan State's Dr. Ron Perry documented this precisely. An unpruned tree becomes what he calls a bush form. Many trunks, dense canopy, bark inclusion where branches press against each other, poor structure, and small fruit. The interior receives almost no usable light. And without light, the tree will not differentiate flower buds, will not set fruit, and will not invest energy into wood that gives no photosynthetic return. The tree is not broken. It is efficient. But its efficiency is working against you because the fruit you want requires the exact conditions the tree has decided to abandon. Wide angles, open canopy, sunlight from multiple directions, and young wood that is actively growing. The global fresh fruit market is valued at $637 billion. The pruning tool industry alone is worth $2.8 billion and growing at nearly 6% per year. Tools are not the problem. Knowledge is the problem. Because in that entire $2.8 billion industry, not a single product label explains the 4 types of cuts that exist in horticulture, which one to use, where to make it, or why it works. So here they are. Cut number 1, the heading cut. This is the most powerful growth trigger in all of fruit tree science, and it is also the most misunderstood. A heading cut is any cut that removes part of a branch, but not all of it. You cut a shoot back to a bud. You shorten a limb by removing its terminal section. The moment you make this cut, you destroy the source of auxin at the tip of that branch. Auxin is the hormone produced in the apical bud, the dominant terminal bud, and it travels downward through the branch, suppressing every lateral bud it passes. This is apical dominance in its purest form. The tip grows and everything below sleeps. When you remove that tip with a heading cut, the auxin supply is severed. Within hours, the buds immediately below the cut receive an influx of cytokinins, a different class of hormones produced in the roots and transported upward through the xylem. Cytokinins promote cell division. They break dormancy. And in combination with gibberellins, another growth hormone released during the dormant season, they trigger vigorous shoot growth from buds that may have been silent for years. Michigan State's Dr. Ron Perry confirmed this in his pruning framework. Pruned trees have more growth promoters, cytokinins, auxins, and gibberellins early in the growing season, which results in greater shoot growth compared to unpruned trees. A 1992 manual by Forshee, Elfing, and Stebbins, published by the American Society for Horticultural Science and running to 166 pages, remains one of the most cited references on this subject. It established that removing the apical bud releases lateral buds from dormancy and redirects the tree's stored carbohydrate reserves into new growth at the site of the cut. The heading cut is not gentle. It is explosive. And that is exactly what a bald, exhausted tree needs, a controlled detonation of new wood in the places where fruit can actually form. But there is a critical warning. A heading cut on a large, mature branch creates serious problems. It generates dense clusters of water sprouts, thin, vertical shoots that grow straight up, produce no fruit, and shade out everything below them. Penn State Extension warns that heading cuts on thick branches cause internal decay, disrupt the tree's natural form, and promote vigorous, weakly attached water sprouts from below the cut. So reserve the heading cut for small branches and young wood where you want to redirect growth and stimulate branching. On a bald tree with large, overgrown limbs, you need a different tool entirely. That brings us to cut number 2. Cut number 2, the thinning cut. If the heading cut is an explosion, the thinning cut is a redirection. A thinning cut removes an entire branch at its point of origin, the exact spot where it connects to the parent limb or the trunk. You do not leave a stub, you do not shorten it, you remove it completely, cutting just outside the branch collar, which is the slight swelling of tissue at the base. This cut does not trigger the same hormonal explosion as a heading cut because you are not destroying an actively growing tip. Instead, you are removing an entire competing limb, and that accomplishes 3 things simultaneously. First, it opens the canopy to light. Dr. Perry documented that improved light penetration leads to better flower bud differentiation, better fruit color and quality, faster wound healing through ultraviolet exposure, and stronger overall branch development. A tree whose interior finally receives direct sunlight begins to invest in its inner branches again, reversing the shutdown that made it go bald in the first place. Second, a thinning cut redirects the tree's resources. Every branch is a consumer of water, sugar, and mineral nutrients. Remove a competing branch, and the survivors receive a greater share of everything. This is precisely why the Valencia orange study published in MDPI Agriculture in 2023 found that removing 75% of the main branches on 35-year-old declining trees produced the longest new shoots, the largest leaf area, the highest juice content per fruit, and a full 20% increase in total yield compared to unpruned controls. Third, thinning cuts reduce the tree's total fruiting surface, which sounds counterintuitive but is essential. When a tree bears too many small, poor quality fruits, it exhausts itself and enters an alternate bearing cycle. Heavy crop 1 year, almost nothing the next. By thinning out overcrowded branches, you improve the ratio of foliage to fruit. The remaining fruit grows larger, develops more sugar, and the tree produces more consistently year over year. Purdue Extension and Oregon State published a 5-step, multi-year renovation process built almost entirely on thinning cuts. In the first dormant season, you remove dead wood and reduce the tree's height by topping the highest risers. In the second dormant season, you remove more than 50% of the regrowth that appeared in the top of the tree and redirect lower limbs upward by thinning to leave one strong upright shoot at the end of each scaffold branch. By the 4th year, the tree in their example had been reduced from 24 feet tall to 17 feet, had developed wide-spreading lower limbs that replaced the lost upper canopy, and was producing an abundance of young fruiting wood, all without a single heading cut on a major limb. Cut number 3, the notch. This is the technique that should have changed backyard orcharding forever and somehow remained buried in university extension bulletins that almost nobody reads. A notch is a small cut made in the bark just above a dormant bud. You are not removing any branch. You are not shortening anything. You are simply interrupting the downward flow of auxin past that single bud. The bud, no longer receiving the hormonal signal to stay dormant, behaves as though it is now the terminal tip of the branch, and it pushes a full new shoot. In 2021, John Clements at the University of Massachusetts ran a controlled trial on 30 newly planted apple tree whips, bare, unbranched sticks with no side growth whatsoever. He double-notched 8 buds on 10 of them using a $5 Anvil-style pruner. He sprayed a commercial cytokinin product called Promelin on 10 others at the labeled rate, and he left 10 completely untreated as controls. By mid-June, the results were unambiguous. The notched trees averaged 8.5 new branch breaks per tree. Nearly every single notched bud broke and grew into a feathered branch. The Promelin-sprayed trees averaged just 1.9, and the untreated controls produced a mere 0.8 branches per tree. The difference was statistically significant. A 5-second mechanical notch with a $5 tool outperformed a laboratory-grade chemical spray by 447%. Washington State University's tree fruit program explains the mechanism directly. A high ratio of auxin to cytokinin inhibits bud break and maintains apical dominance. The notch physically severs the auxin stream above a specific bud without damaging the bud itself, changing that ratio locally at the precise point where you want a new branch. On younger wood with visible viable buds, it is nearly foolproof. For anyone with a fruit tree that has long, bare stretches of branch with no lateral growth, what orchardists call blind wood, the notch is the single most effective intervention that exists. No chemical required, no spray, no product to purchase, just a small pruner and 5 seconds of deliberate contact with the bark. Cut number 4, the bevel cut. This is the renovation specialist's cut, designed for old, exhausted branches that have stopped producing fruit and need to be replaced without removing the entire scaffold limb. Dr. Ron Perry at Michigan State demonstrated this technique in his mature tree pruning framework. Instead of cutting a large branch flush at its base, which leaves a wound that may take years to form a complete callus, you cut it at an angle and leave a 1 to 2 inch stub on the upper side. That stub contains latent buds. Because the stub is oriented upward and receives direct light, the highest bud on the stub, now freed from the auxin dominance of the branch you removed, pushes a vigorous new shoot. That shoot grows outward in the approximate direction of the former branch, eventually replacing it entirely with young, productive, fruit-bearing wood within 2 to 3 growing seasons. The bevel cut is elegant because it combines the principles of the first 3 cuts into one single action. It removes competing wood like a thinning cut, it stimulates localized bud break like a heading cut, and it targets a specific dormant bud like a notch. Perry recommends this cut for recycling scaffold branches that have become too large, too heavy, and are yielding diminishing returns in both fruit quantity and fruit quality. Now the sequence matters. If you have a neglected tree that has not been pruned in 5 or 10 or 20 years, do not go outside tomorrow and make all 4 cuts at once. Purdue Extension and Oregon State both emphasize that restoration pruning must be spread across 3 to 4 dormant seasons. In year 1, focus entirely on thinning cuts, remove all dead wood, reduce the overall tree height, and open up the canopy so that sunlight can finally penetrate the interior. In year 2, evaluate the regrowth that appeared. Remove water sprouts in the upper canopy, thin to keep only the strongest new shoots, and begin redirecting lower limbs with selective heading cuts applied only to small young wood. In year 3, begin notching bare sections of branch where you want new lateral growth to emerge. And in year 4, use bevel cuts to start replacing any remaining old, exhausted scaffold limbs with young, productive ones. The Purdue Guide explicitly warns that doing all the heavy cutting at once produces excessive and unmanageable regrowth. The goal is to remove no more than roughly 30% of the living canopy in any single year. There is one final principle that ties all 4 cuts together, and it may be the most important detail of all. Branch angle. Research published in Hort Science and confirmed by Washington State's tree fruit program shows that branches trained to a 45 to 60 degree angle from vertical produce significantly more fruit buds than upright branches. The mechanism is hormonal. In a vertical branch, auxin flows uniformly downward and maintains strong apical dominance. When a branch is angled toward horizontal, gravity disrupts the auxin transport. The concentration pattern shifts. Cytokinins rising from the roots gain greater influence over the lateral buds. And those buds begin to differentiate into flower buds instead of vegetative buds. The branch stops growing longer and starts producing fruit. This is why orchardists have weighted down branches for centuries using sandbags, clothespins, wooden spacers, and lengths of twine. It is not a tradition. It is hormonal manipulation that converts vegetative wood into reproductive wood, and it works on old trees as effectively as it does on newly planted ones. Let us be direct about what happened. In 1937, Wendt and Timon published The Science of Auxine. In the 1950s and 60s, extension services at every major land-grant university in this country taught these pruning principles to farmers, orchardists, and home gardeners. Your grandparents' generation pruned their fruit trees every single February because they had watched their own parents do it before them. They did not know the word auxin, they did not understand cytokinin ratios or gibberellin signaling, but they knew from direct observation, passed down through generations, that a tree cut in winter grew back stronger in spring. Then came the post-war suburban expansion. Homes were built on quarter-acre lots with ornamental landscapes. Fruit trees became decorative. Pruning became the job of a hired service or of nobody at all. And in one generation, the knowledge disappeared. Today, 71.5 million American households garden. More than 1 in 3 grow food at home. And in millions of those yards, there stands a fruit tree that has not been properly pruned in years. The tree is alive. The roots are strong. Embedded in the bark of every limb are hundreds of dormant buds. Each one a potential branch, each one capable of producing flowers, setting fruit, and feeding a family. The only thing standing between that tree and a full productive canopy is 4 cuts, made in the right order, at the right time, in the right places. A heading cut to break dormancy on young wood, a thinning cut to open the canopy and redirect the tree's resources, a notch to wake a specific sleeping bud on bare wood, and a bevel cut to replace an old exhausted limb with a young vigorous one. These 4 cuts have been studied, measured, and confirmed at research institutions across 3 continents. They cost nothing. They require no chemicals, no products, and no professional equipment beyond a pair of sharp bypass shears and a $5 anvil pruner. They work on apples, pears, cherries, plums, citrus, guava, and virtually every fruit tree on earth that obeys the laws of auxin and cytokinin, which is every single one of them. Your tree is not dead. It is not finished. It has been waiting, patiently, silently, bud by dormant bud, for the cut that finally tells it to grow again. Now you know exactly where to make it.